Banging next door. Right. Ooh, that's quite loud. Apologies about that. Good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see you all. We're here for the session which is on nature's wealth, bridging economic resilience with water and biodiversity prosperity. Today we are at a crucial intersection where the sustainability of our natural environment is deeply intertwined with our economic future. As we confront unprecedented environmental challenges, including climate change, water scarcity, and biodiversity loss, it's imperative to acknowledge that our economic resilience is inextricably linked to the health of the planet's ecosystems. I've got a very distinguished panel here today, and we have a couple of contributors online. Now, I'd like to just start to introduce a cartoonist, or a cartoonist, if I can say that word. Rohan Chakravarti is a multi-award-winning cartoonist who's been practicing since 2010. He was, I think, the first Indian cartoonist to receive, to be employed by a global comic company. And he is going to be working throughout this session, I think, interacting with the comments and insights, and then we'll be presenting back his work at the end of the session. So, hello there, Rohan. And online we also have Ingrid, who will be doing a presentation. Now, you'll be glad to hear that you'll be hearing little from me, because that's mostly how my facilitations work. And we're doing some quick-fire presentations from a number of the panelists, and then we're going to get some insight or some reflections from Dan, and then hopefully open that up to a discussion. So without further ado, because we do have a clock running, I'm going to hand over to Jane Madrick, the Executive Director of the Global Commons Alliance, for her presentation. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm representing the Global Commons Alliance, but also the Water Resilience for Economic Resilience network and initiative, which has been coordinated, facilitated by the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. So I'm going to say something about the problem that links water, nature, and economic resilience, and then something about the key ingredients for solutions. So that the heart of the problem, as I see it, is that a growing economy basically depends on consuming more water. And this is bringing massive water risks, mostly because the increasing variability of water resources due to climate change is rarely taken into account. And I've seen several major infrastructure schemes developed, for example, which rely on a certain amount of water, and they are built and invested on under the premise that that water will be available, and there basically never was that water availability there. So now we see clear evidence that the limited freshwater resources that are in the world are not able to continuously satisfy this growing demand for water to feed economic growth, the growing population, alongside the degradation of the water environment and a changing climate. So this water scarcity, these changes, is bringing real impacts on people and the economy and even human security. Around 4 billion people now face water scarcity. And this, of course, is a major limit on sustainable development of the economy. And this then leads to diminished freshwater environments and undermining key production, fisheries and agriculture, as well as water availability for drinking and generating power. And what's more, hard-won development gains that have been made in the past can be quickly knocked back by environmental shocks due to these changes in water resources and the impacts on the economy. And this is affecting mostly the already poor and vulnerable people in the world. So it's a kind of vicious circle. And at the heart of this, we do know that it's who the culprits are, what the culprits are, flow alterations, dams, overexploitation of groundwater, primarily. And then on top of that, we're getting increasing economic shocks through water-related disasters. And the water disasters make up most of the so-called natural disasters. And they're really caused by a deadly combination of environmental degradation plus climate change. Usually the journalists label it as climate change. If you look into many of these environmental disasters, floods, droughts, fires, etc., you will find behind those that degradation of the natural environment, and especially drainage and conversion of water-related habitats like forests and wetlands, is at the heart of the problem. So the capacity of the environment to buffer people from these disasters has been undermined. Okay, that's really a quick sketch of the problem. Solution has so far been focused on single project or single sector de-risking of the project or the infrastructure. But more recently, this concept of building economic resilience has come to the fore. And this is much more about bringing robustness and flexibility to landscapes, to infrastructure designs, and to institutions to allow adaptation to an uncertain future. And this requires creative and intentional design and planning at different spatial and geographical scales. And it requires collaboration often with your neighbours and other players in the landscape. So ultimately, the economic resilience depends on the resilience of the underlying natural system. There was one slide, if you can flick forward to that, because that's referring to the recent work of the Earth Commission. Yes, that's the one. Who've just recently published the Safe and Just Boundaries, which provides numerical limits to 5 of the Earth systems which are underpinning all life on the planet. And they are essentially a measure of resilience. So it's a complex picture, but if you look for the green part in the middle, basically we need to be in that space to have an environmentally safe, resilient Earth. And then you see the different segments, and the dots represent where we are. And you can see that we have overstretched those boundaries for these 5 Earth systems, water, fresh water being one of those. So these are the hard limits to nature's economy. And this is transformational and inspirational in some ways, because these hard limits can be and should be translated down to regions, to basins, to cities, to companies. And that's really the next phase of the work the Global Commons Alliance is doing, together with local partnerships. The urgency to take this path is being underlined, for example, by the IPCC, and really bringing up water resilience as a necessary step to economic resilience. I'll just give 3 lines on what the ingredients should be in those solutions. Firstly, water resilience needs to be at the heart of climate action. I think this is a call being made at this COP strongly. And water resilience as an economic principle in development planning, decoupling economic growth from water consumption. And thirdly, we need to develop economic accounting systems that can connect climate, water, and nature and these other Earth systems together. Currently, they're separate or commonly only focusing on climate, and they're not connecting with what's happening with the natural systems around. So these are the next steps, I believe, in bringing water resiliency closer to economic resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That was a lot of detail and some good solutions in a very short space of time, and very, very, very disciplined on keeping that time. Thank you. I'd like to hand over now to Eddie Jarega, the president of the Apatana Water Fund. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you very much, James. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with a very short anecdote, and I know I've been told we haven't got a lot of time, but it takes me back to 2015. I was sitting at the riverbank with an 85-year-old man, Kabiro Amwane Mwaura, at the banks of River Diara in the heart of Murang'a in central Kenya. And this gentleman, with a hint of nostalgia and with a very clear memory, narrated to me how his brother was swept and drowned by the river in exactly where we were seated. And he said this was before the war, which I assumed to mean this was before the Second World War. So I would put it at about 1939 or thereabouts, which means that he was 9 years old. But he gave with very vivid details how his brother was carried away and his body was found 2 miles down the road, down the river. When I then looked at the river, now as it was, I could not help but really come face to face with the reality of what we had done. Because this river, which had drowned somebody now, cannot even drown even a small kid. And this river, when then I looked across and I saw the deforestation which has been done, and even behind me where we were seated. And across the river, or to my right and to my left, there were farms across the riparian. And not just the farming, there were, at that point, there were dams. People had dug small dams, which was trapping the water, and then put in small diesel generators, which were then spewing some oil into the river. And I could also see some people with knapsacks on their back trying to spray the crops so that they can get more money for the crops. These are inorganic sprays, and all that was going into the river. And as we sat there with this man, I could also not help really feel sorry for ourselves and our country, because this river is the one which meets with another river, and it goes into what we call Dakaine Dam, which supplies Nairobi with 90% of its water supply. And from there, it also goes in the Tana River, which the Tana River cascade supplies about 600 megawatts of electricity to Kenya. And so all these were being affected. And there was the ecosystem which was being affected was all being so fragile and could not be able to sustain what was happening. And this is why we set up Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund in 2017. And at that time, we realized that we needed to do more to make sure that we reverse what I have just described, because these activities now had reduced the water which was getting into the dam to a point where we felt that, and also the water which was coming in was very turbid and obviously very polluted. And one of the things that we felt we needed to do is to make sure that we can be able to reverse that. So the Upper Tana, we started working in 2017, and there are approximately 300,000 farmers like Kabiro in that area, covering about 1 million hectares, which forms the catchment area for Nairobi Water. We started working with these farmers in 2017, and currently we are working directly with about 100,000 farmers in various areas that we work with them, in soil and water, where we help them in terms of identifying the soil types, in calculating the water demand, in providing water pans and drip irrigation schemes, in agroforestry, making sure that they plant the right types of trees, in climate and weather advisory, in planning and record keeping. And all these are to help the farmers so that they can have better farming methods. And so what have we seen over the past 5 years? Over 140,000 farmers have been receiving extension and advisory messages through the SMS platform. Nearly 4 million trees, seedlings, have been planted in the watershed and further. We also had a program where we planted 1.3 million avocado trees between 2017 and 2019. About 15,000 individual rainwater harvesting ponds we have put up, and 3 large communal water ponds. about 700 drip irrigation kits, and about 300 kilometer acres of farmland under improved soil and water management. We also have reforested about 1,700 acres. And to make sure that these programs also continue, we have introduced them into schools. And currently we have 96 schools which have started environmental education programs. And so far, about 35,000 youth have benefited from this. And what, therefore, is the result of what we have seen? As a result of what we have been working on over those 5 years or so, there is 45 million more liters of water flowing into Nairobi reservoirs daily, 16% reduction in turbidity of this water. There is 40 million liters of water harvested by the farmers annually, and the communal water ponds serve about 4,000 families. There is, of course, increased livelihood for the farmers. The fruit trees that I talked about will be fetching them about $67 million per year. And all this has resulted in more resiliency of our water supply. We are not yet there, but we are on the right path. And perhaps in the lifetime of Mr. Kabiro Amuremi, we will be able to restore River Diara Patri to its past glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. That was very insightful. I'd like to pass now over to Dr. Gareth Thomas, who's the Head of Research and Innovation at the Natural History Museum. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you. Thanks, James. And yeah, Eddie, amazing work, somewhat embarrassing to follow. But I want to talk about the essential role of biodiversity and nature in ensuring a healthy planet for us as human well-beings. You know, we find ourselves at a critical juncture where a global investment gap poses a significant threat to the future of biodiversity and the ecosystems that sustain us. So biodiversity, I don't need to tell people here, but that intricate mosaic of life that provides a myriad of benefits, from fertile soils to clean air and water to medicines and food security. However, the delay in conservation not only jeopardizes these invaluable resources, but also increases the costs due to ecosystem degradation and species loss. So this in turn compounds environmental and economical challenges, creating a very precarious situation for future generations. And at the core of effective conservation is nature-based solutions. And at the museum, we try to do our part in many different ways, and one of those is through biodiversity data and modelling that data to understand the nuances. And these tools are essential for not only monitoring but predicting future changes in biodiversity, enabling efficient resource allocation and the implementation of proactive conservation strategies. And embracing these type of metrics can reduce economic burdens and foster timely action to safeguard the biodiversity that sustains us. Just a brief moment to delve into a preliminary piece of analysis we did on the run-up to this COP, the 30 by 30 analysis, which is aligns with Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which aims to protect and restore 30% of our planet by 2030. Now, what we found was 90% of terrestrial ecosystem services are contained within only 30% of the land. And of that 90%, only 5.6% is within protected areas. And now more than 6 billion people rely on those ecosystem services. And so the current global network of protected areas, whilst effective in some respects, neglects many of the local ecosystem services that are so vital for humans. And our sort of preliminary analysis using the Biodiversity Intactness Index has shown that nature in those areas is declining as rapidly as areas outside. And sort of expanding our outlook on biodiversity conservation is crucial, emphasising that it goes beyond the preservation of individual species, which we hear so much about, and that's so intrinsically important, but it involves safeguarding local ecosystems and preserving those critical natural assets that deliver those ecosystem services. And it's our shared duty to address these gaps in protection, guaranteeing that those areas essential for humans are safeguarded for future generations. And achieving this goal demands investment, not only from governments, but also from the private sectors. And delaying that investment, as we found out in a piece of analysis we did in 2021, not only increases future investment requires, but delays the restoration of nature by decades. And so as we embark on this mission, we must also recognise the vital importance of preserving water-based environments. Water, as a fundamental element of our planet, plays a pivotal role in sustaining biodiversity, as well as fortifying economic resilience. And this water resilience is intrinsically linked to economic stability, ensuring clean water for the likes of industry, agriculture, and of course communities. And recognising the interconnectedness of land and water conservation is essential for ensuring the holistic health of our planet. And this underscores the urgency for the academic community, as well as NGOs and private industry, to come together to develop a comprehensive freshwater and marine biodiversity index. And the museum, we're very open to collaborate. That's not something we've done right now, but if the will's there, then we're there. So in conclusion, we should be inspired by the urgency of this mission. Together, we do have the power to drive and to motivate and make a lasting impact. And together we can bend the curve on biodiversity loss. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to switch online now to Ingrid Kukuljan, Head of Impact and Sustainable Investing at Federated Hermes. There she is. Hi. Hi there, Ingrid.
Hi.
I'll pass over to you now.
Hi. Thank you, James. Good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, I am part of that industry which has been allowing corporates to relentlessly exploit water like nature, forgetting that it's just another scarce resource which is becoming more scarce by the day. For us at Federated Hermes, water has been part of our fiduciary duty, and we believe this would be the case for all of the investment asset owners as well as managers, for a simple reason. It's one of the biggest systemic risks that we are facing as a global economy, as well as being essential to all life on our planet. So what's the current situation? I mean, the water, food, climate nexus is clear. You have heard this from all the previous speakers. But the facts are that with this 1% of the fresh water that we have on the planet, 70% of it is used for agriculture, 20% is used for industry, and only 10% for the domestic consumption. At the same time, as we heard, 4 billion people already don't have access to water as we do in the developed world globally. The trouble is that the expectation is that the water demand will increase by 20 to 30% over the coming decades, at the same time as the frequency and the severity of drought is exacerbated. So all of this poses obviously operational and reputational risk to corporates and investors. Water shortages are likely to contribute to higher food prices, geopolitical risk, and human displacement at scale. So what can be done? The risks abound, obviously. The climate goals are at risk because we need water to produce energy. And on the other hand, we need energy to produce food. We have already seen the inflationary risks that come from food shortages, and water-intensive industries may be at risk for two reasons. The first reason is that obviously no access to water due to droughts, but the second one is that the governments will probably prioritize food production and water savings over industrial production. So what you might find yourself is owning companies that will have to face much higher water costs, or that will be stuck with stranded assets. Take meat production as an example. It's already an industry that is the main culprit for deforestation, but in addition, it uses 10 times more water than crop production. Another great example is what happened this summer in the state of Arizona, in Phoenix, where the government has put a moratorium on all of the new construction that depends on groundwater. So the risks are real, and investors have to analyze their sector exposure, taking into account these factors, the same way they have to engage with corporates and ask them to do the same. But the interesting part is that we believe that on the investor side, they have to take water into consideration and ensure the resilience by looking at it the same way that we are looking at energy. Look for efficiencies. And this is where we see huge opportunities to create global resilience in water. Replacement of infrastructure, which is outdated globally. Innovation in agriculture, which is a huge need, given that it uses so much water. And it's not only about more efficient irrigation systems, it's also about seed crops that use less water than what we are used to traditionally, technologies for rainwater capture and reuse, technologies for better water and waste treatment to protect our waterways and biodiversity. So there are risks and opportunities, but we believe the key is that it needs to be a part of the fiduciary duty, which is not so far. And these are just a few examples that you heard to illustrate what are the risks that we are facing as investors or corporates. But the bottom line is that today, externalities, the cost of the planet is not being priced in properly. And apart from the corporate initiatives that we are seeing here and there, we really need legislation to price those into a level playing field so that exploiting water or nature will no longer be seen as a winning business model. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. So I'd like to just hand over to Dan over in the corner there, Dan O'Brien. Now Dan is a senior partner of PwC in Canada and a participating member of the TNFD, Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. Dan, you're not doing a presentation, but I'd like you just to give your reflections on what you've heard so far, and then maybe just walk us through the kind of the work that PwC has been doing in relation to some of these initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, James, and great to see everybody today. When I hear the four different speakers talk about our reliance and dependency on water and on nature, what comes to mind is the challenge I think that a lot of industry has in making the connection between their business activities and the broader ecosystem services and ecosystem assets that they're dependent on. So we now have a framework, the TNFD and the LEAP assessment approach, which James and I have been involved in over the last couple of years, which provides that methodology for how organizations, how financial institutions and corporates can start to unravel these intricate dependencies that they have. A couple of years ago, we PwC did some work with the World Economic Forum to try to quantify what the economic dependencies are. And we looked at different business activities in different industries. And through some modeling work, we estimated that almost or just over half of global economic activity has a material dependency on nature, meaning that if those natural ecosystem services fail, that those businesses will experience significant financial losses, and in some cases they'll cease to operate. And we updated that figure earlier this year, and it represents $58 trillion of annual economic activity. So that's a pretty big number. But it also points to where there's material dependencies. And I think the most important thing to recognize is that all of our economy, all of our business activities are dependent on nature in some way, shape, or form. So I think where this starts to kind of come together in terms of what we've heard today is this concept that's being floated around, this concept of being nature positive. And nature positive is it's similar in terms of an ambition that organizations can strive towards, similar to net zero, but it hasn't really had a very clear definition in terms of what it means. And I think that is coming. We'll have a clear definition in terms of what nature positive means. But the reason I bring it up is because, in terms of resiliency and in terms of water, and how businesses are dependent on water, the concept of nature positive actually allows for organizations to start to look beyond their own direct business activities and their own operations to what are the broader issues that affect them. And they may not be direct. They may not be, like if you think about certain extractives industries that have direct dependencies on water to produce their goods or to allow them to emit their emissions. But those are the things that they have to get control of in order to just demonstrate that they're neutral, right? They need to be able to compensate for those activities. But if they want to get to a position of being able to claim that they're nature positive, then they need to start looking more broadly to the regional issues that are potentially affecting their business. And these may not be direct effects. They may be things like the degradation of forests in a watershed that they're operating in, and maybe they're not the only actor. There might be cumulative effects that are contributing to this. And understanding that this degradation is going to have potentially medium or long-term effects for them in terms of the provisioning of or the regulation of water. But in order to do that, there's a couple of key things that need to be in place. There needs to be an understanding of what those priority issues are. And I think that's where the academic community and local communities, governments can start to signal to what are the restoration activities, what are the conservation initiatives that will start to allow for improvement of these ecosystem services, which speaks to sort of the points that Garrett was making. And then the ability to fund these activities, and that's I think where Eddie, your example was a really good one, where it's not going to be one single organization, or it's unlikely to be one single company that is going to raise the capital required to carry out a very large-scale restoration or reforestation. But if there is the willingness and there's an organization there to allow for the crowding in of that funding, then companies that are operating in those areas can then start to make those contributions, which over time will allow them to demonstrate that they are getting to this nature positive position where they're starting to contribute to these broader regional scale initiatives that may not be directly impacting them, but may have indirect impacts to them down the road and help them to mitigate some of the longer term and medium and longer term risks associated with nature degradation. So, I think the point that I'm trying to make is, water is one example of a natural asset that our society is dependent on. And the provisioning and the regulation of water is another good example of an ecosystem service that we're all dependent on. But they're often not things that are easy to make a direct link or a direct attribution to specific business activities. And so I'm hopeful that through this concept of nature positive, that it will allow for organizations to sort of look beyond their own operations and identify areas that they can start to invest in that will enhance these ecosystem services and mitigate these longer-term risks for them. And so it's through things like the opportunities to identify where those priorities are, and then funding initiatives, et cetera, and the willingness of businesses that will allow for that to happen. So that's my attempt to kind of tie it all together from what we've been talking about. Hopefully that sort of makes some sense.
Dan, absolutely. That worked very well, tying everything together. Now, I have a list of structured questions, which I'm very happy to ask, but I really wanted to try and see whether we get a free-flowing conversation going as well. And also, please, if you had any questions or points you wanted to raise at any point, it would be great to have that, so it wasn't just a case of us talking at you, right? It's important that we have that discussion. But Jane, just coming to you, do you have any reflections, again, hearing from Eddie in a specific case study, but also, you know, hearing the challenges perhaps from the finance community in engaging around, you know, the best route forward and how to bring together different stakeholders?
Yeah, this does work. Yes, thanks for that. There's a lot already been put on the table. What I would like to add, perhaps, is the concept of water sharing and moving towards that approach for companies or cities in a given basin or landscape. I think there we start to see real collaboration, real collective action around a vision and targets for a landscape for water use, which can be linked to the range of benefits that have been mentioned here today. So I think water sharing is a key part of the solution. Of course, it brings in the notion of equity as well, because often what happens is those who can take the water, and at the disbenefit of others who really don't have that potential and that capability. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. The Rift Valley Lakes in Ethiopia, where Dutch and French-based floriculture, so growing the red roses, etc., are sucking up the groundwater at an alarming rate. And that is reducing the available water for tens of thousands of smallholder farmers and fishers who work together in a cooperative. They are also wasteful of water, by the way, but they are now moving to increase their efficiency of use. They are halving or doubling the efficiency, if you like. But the floriculture business doesn't want to really come to the table. But there is a process which is being done by the Basin Authority and supported by international efforts to bring everyone around the table, to say, look, everyone's business, everybody's livelihood is going to suffer when the water runs out. So we need to have a solution. And then what's coming is a water allocation planning, sharing, which allows sustainability for all. And more than just survival for the smallholders, actually stepping up their business as well. So I think water sharing is a key one. I also would like to mention science-based targets for nature, because unlike the nature positive initiative and concept, which is measured by biodiversity, which I'm part of and I'm all for, that's about biodiversity. But water and other natural systems are captured in science-based targets for nature, which are now being trialled with 17 companies. And there already is the methodology, the pathway for any company to start to look at the impacts and dependencies they have and to start to set targets which are going to collectively make a big difference. So I think that's a key part of the solution.
Thank you, Jane. Any follow-up on the panel on those points? I have a quick question which is related and it'll be a bit rambling, but an observation for me over this week has been the growing appetite from companies and financial institutions to engage, and we're seeing initiatives like the Science-Based Target Initiative, the TNFD, and regulations come through, but there seems to be a disconnect with enabling smallholders. So it's almost like a fire hose approach to try and do good, but actually there's a disenfranchisement with the smallholders in that it doesn't quite work in the way it's supposed to. Eddie, I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Let me just maybe comment on what I've felt from the discussion so far in terms of the other stakeholders, and is the interconnectivity between all of them, from the nature to the water to the economy and the financing of all that. So I felt there is a thread right through that, and how interconnected we are as we try to be more resilient in terms of our economy, in terms of our water, and that means that we must do something about our nature. In terms of the small stakeholders, it's surprising how much they can uptake technology. Obviously, in Kenya, we are advantaged because the penetration of mobile phone is very, very high, and especially on the areas where we are working in Kenya is extremely high. And therefore, we are able to have all the farmers, for instance, connected on a platform where we can be able to give them information on the weather, on what is happening about the rainfall, and also they can get information on preparation for their farms and all that. So we are using that, and they feed back to us because they do check on the flows of the water, for instance. So they feed us back. So that's how we're able to monitor actually the increase in terms of the flow of water so far, coming from the farmers. So we are advantaged in that way, that the farmers can be able to do that. And that's one of the things that we do with the farmers that we enroll. We make sure that they can be able to engage and send us back information, and we are able to communicate with them. And it is so important because that has helped that the farmer is not even preparing their shamba early before the rains come, because we are able to inform them when the rains are due to come, and they're able to prepare on time. So it really has helped the farmers, yeah.
Thank you, Eddie. Gareth, you want to jump in?
Thank you. So when you look at NGOs, not-for-profits, small stakeholders, they understand the value of nature and its interconnectedness. And that's what we need from finance for the large multinationals, to understand the intrinsic value of nature beyond just its exploitable resources. So, I spoke about at the beginning the value of ecosystem services, and I'll use a terrestrial one, apologies, but pollination, right? So provides billions to agriculture, but what do we give back? And sometimes I wonder, is there this over-reliance that science, technology will sort it out? Ask ChatGPT to figure out the world and hope it all goes away. But if we take that example of bees and pollinators, quite often in conversation, you'll hear people say, oh, yeah, bees are important, but of course we have drone bees now, these robot bees, and they're going to save the world and everything's going to be fine. But let's just break that down for a moment. So I'll ask you a question, James. The honeybee, one species. How many honeybees do you think there are on Earth?
Doug, help me out. I don't know. Way fewer than I would say. I have no idea.
No. There's a lot. Not millions, not billions, but there's probably 16 trillion. Now, no one's gone out there and counted them all, obviously. That's an estimate based on statistics. But about 16 trillion honeybees, one species. There are 20,000 species of bees. So there are hundreds of trillions, if not quadrillions, of bees. There are also hundreds of trillions of other pollinators, damselflies, hoverflies. Now, these little drone bees are not going to replace that many. Now, you talk to the engineers, they are very smart people. They can make these robot bees weigh nothing, and they have little solar panels on to self-power, and they can scatter them, and they will self-assemble, and that is, in the concept of engineering, quite amazing. But we have self-generating, self-powering, self-renewing pollinators, and they're called bees.
Dan, yeah.
I think I read a story just a couple days ago about the value of nature, and it was remarking that the value of nature is the cost of having honeybee hives stolen from farmlands because they're so valuable now because as pollinators. But I think just to add to this discussion, I was at the regenerative landscape session last night, which was launching this regenerative landscapes action committee, I think it's called, which is one of the central themes of COP28. And one of the videos that they were showing was a farmer, and he was talking about this concept of regenerative agriculture and how regenerative agriculture can be adopted, and it speaks to the small and medium-sized stakeholders and farmers. And he quite simply put it that there's two factors that you have to address. One is they need to be shown that it's logistically and technically feasible, and two, the risk, the economic risk has to be taken out of the equation because they can't afford to take those kinds of risks. So I think if you, and this applies not just to farming and agriculture, but other smallholder resource activities as well. I think if you address those two key things, then you can affect transformational change in those industries. So, what are the things that can provide those technological and logistical the feasibility and de-risk these types of investments. So I think if you can solve those two things, then that, to his point, that will help affect that transformation.
Yes, Jane, go on. Just wanted to say very quickly, just on your point, Gareth, it's quite sobering that we can have a valuation of an AI company at 85 billion, but we can't value intelligence versus artificial intelligence. There we go.
I just wanted to comment on your point there. I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of really promising initiatives which do just exactly what you said, which take the risk away from local communities, groups of smallholder farmers, and who are very keen, for example, to restore the degraded watershed, which is going to allow the springs to recover, for example, because they understand that's good for their future and their livelihood. And so there are many well-tested, well-tried approaches through innovative finance and through capacity development. The problem with all of them is that they're still small scale. So I've seen a lot of these myself, and hugely proud of some of them because they really have transformed whole landscapes, and the local economy is thriving, the biodiversity is coming back, and they're super gems. But the key issue is how do you scale that up? Because much of the finance needs to be delivered in big chunks, and when you give a big chunk of finance to government, what they do with it is build something big, and instead of find a way to distribute that across tens of thousands of smallholders. And that financial investment problem needs to be solved. But I really want to underline that the work is done over the last decades on how to make this happen, and increasingly how to measure the multiple benefits, the real business case, if you like, for such transformations. That's there. What we need is the finance community to help us work out, together with the governance systems, how to bring this to scale. I think that's the key part.
Thank you, Jane. Just conscious of time, and we're going to be bringing Rohan back in at the end to present his work. Is Ingrid still online? Ingrid?
Line
Calling Ingrid?
and just
Yes, hi
just to
Ingrid.
comment.
Just, I wondered whether you can just draw on those comments and give the financial market perspective. Conscious that you are a progressive player in the market, so it's probably perhaps not reflective, but how do you bring the rest of the market
Just to what Jane was saying now, I mean, there are a couple of problems. The first one, that the risk is not being priced properly, and everybody's still thinking in terms of the returns rather than the reduction of systemic risk, because there should be an understanding that if we don't start doing this, there won't be any returns in a decade or so, because there won't be anything left, because we would have degraded everything. Second problem is that the C-suite is not being taken accountable. It's not being held accountable, and share buybacks and dividends are still more preferable than having a set amount of your capex that should be going into sustainable initiatives. The last part of the problem are the regulators and the policymakers, and the UK water industry is a prime example after all of the scandals where there was no monitoring, that, the fines were so low, the burden of, let's call it restructuring of the whole industry, is going to fall onto the consumer. So you have the problem with the regulator, the policymakers, the companies themselves, the asset owners, and then the investors who are actually not pricing the systemic risk properly. So those are the four pillars that really need to be addressed at scale by the finance industry before we can make any, formidable way forward with this.
Thank you, Ingrid. A slightly depressing close to the session, but I suppose a dose of reality required. So we are at close, but if we can bring Rohan back in, hopefully to G us back up and give us some humor to close the session. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for this panel. I am somebody who draws cartoons about environmental issues from the lens of biodiversity and wildlife. So I feel like I've been heard at COP28. So thanks for that. Here are the 4 cartoons I've done based on what all was discussed today. Here we go. For the sake of swiftness and brevity, I'm going to read out these cartoons to you. I was expecting sunk boats to emerge from drying riverbeds, but not stark warnings. And what is the stark warning? No climate resilience without water resilience. The second one. It's the biodiversity delegation speaking at COP28, and the flamingo, the speaker, says, "Let me get this right. You need to be convinced that your only life support system is a profitable business asset." Here's the third one. It's not called good business when both parties don't benefit mutually, right? And the final one, where I really felt the need to bring in the national animal of the place where the COP28 is being held. As UAE's national animal, the Arabian oryx, I'm here to remind governments, funders, and stakeholders that you too are biodiversity. Thanks, everyone. I'll be in touch with Sophie, and if you can let me know which 2 or 3 of these 4 you've liked the best, I'll keep them furnished and ready for your publications, your presentations, and your pitches. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. That was a fantastic summation of the session. And I think we can just sort of close there. It's clear there are huge challenges ahead. It's clear the severity of the situation we're in, but there are some great examples of the work being done on the ground. So I think onwards, and let's make some progress. Thank you.